Hello, my name is lesfleursdelanuit. I'm a photographer who specializes in macro photography and artistic editing. This is the ninth of a multi-part series that teaches you how to create a dreamy minimalistic edit. In this tutorial, we will add light into our image. To do so, we'll first add in some light rays. Then we will add in golden ambient light. Finally, we will add in white, soft, diffuse ambient lighting. Okay, let's get started. So for this group lighting, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to call it merge result. Press OK. And then we're going to go to image, apply image. We're going to make sure everything is set as is. Once again, that's channels RGB, layer merge, invert is unchecked, blending is multiply, and opacity is 100. So we're going to press OK. Okay, so I've gone ahead and added this light ray overlay to my layer panel. I got this light ray overlay from a good friend of mine named Yasminka Asbon. You can find her on Instagram as Yasminka_Asbon. So the first thing we're going to do with this light ray overlay is we're going to adjust the blending mode. So we're going to change it from normal to screen. Now, it's a good idea whenever you're working with light overlays of any sort, so whether they're rays like this or whether there's something like a spotlight, it's always a good idea to use the screen overlay mode or the screen blending mode. So now we're going to attach a mask to the light ray overlay layer. So to do that, we're just going to click this button right here. Now we want to attach a gradient mask, so a linear gradient mask. So to do that in Photoshop, you need to make sure that the gradient is selected here. Then you need to make sure that you have a linear gradient selected. And then what you're going to do is once again, make sure your mask is selected, and then you're going to draw the linear gradient. Okay, so that looks good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer and create another light ray layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the mask that currently exists on this layer. So we're going to right click on the mask and then press delete layer mask. And now we're going to blur these rays a little bit. We're going to use radial blur. So we're going to go to filter, blur, radial blur. We're going to click on the center here and we're going to drag it to the upper right hand corner. We're going to change amount to 100. And then we're going to change quality. Well, no, we're not going to touch quality. What we're going to do is change blur method. We're going to change it from spin to zoom. That's the most important part. I'll press OK. And we're going to do it one more time. So filter, blur, radial blur. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and reattach a mask. So we're going to click this button while we have our current layer selected. It's going to be a gradient mask as before. It's going to be a radial mask as before. So we want everything to be as it was before. So we click here, make sure this is well, it's going to be a linear gradient mask. I'm sorry. We want everything to be as it is before. So let's make sure we have this checked or clicked. And up here where it says where we choose the type of gradient, we have to make sure that we have a linear gradient selected. So now we're going to make sure the mask is selected and we're going to draw once again. And now we're going to fade this layer a little bit. So we're going to change the opacity from 100% to something like 22. And we're going to duplicate this layer a few times. Right click, duplicate layer. For each of our duplicates, we're going to remove the mask. And we're going to apply the radial blur to each duplicate a different amount of times. So to this one, we'll apply it twice, and to the one on top, we'll apply it 4 times. So let's go ahead and apply the radial blur. So filter, blur, radial blur. So now we've blurred each of these layers at different degrees. We're going to reattach mask to each. So we're going to select each layer and attach a mask. And now we're going to add a linear gradient mask to each as we did before. And for this one, we're going to increase the opacity from 22% to 50. Well, actually, what we're going to do for this one is reduce the opacity to 8. That looks nice. Or 12. That looks nice. For this one, we will, let's play with the opacity. Increasing it does that. We're going to increase it to 41%. And that looks pretty nice. So now we've added some light in, and it's done more than just brighten our photo. It's also added some color. It's warmed the entire image up. So what we want to do is we want to create a group from all these light ray overlay layers. We're going to select all of them. Then we're going to right click, group from layers. We're going to name this light rays. We're going to press OK. We're going to adjust the opacity of the entire group to 80%. And then we're going to apply a mask to the entire group itself. So with the group selected, we're going to press this button here. And now we're going to go in and we're going to mask out the parts of the flowers that we do not want affected by the lighting. The problem with lighting is that it can obscure details. And so we want to make sure that we mask out parts of the flowers that we do not want any details obscured in. So we're going to select our brush tool. We're going to make sure we're working with black. So I've selected black. Press OK. And then we're going to paint over the parts of the flower that we do not want affected by the light. So now we're going to go in and add in some golden ambient light. In order to do this, we're going to open up the group that we just made. We're going to select one of the layers. We're going to right click and duplicate that layer. It doesn't matter what the name is. Press OK. Wait for it to be created. Now we're going to take that layer and drag it up out of the group and place it directly above the group. So now we're going to delete the layer mask. So click on the layer mask and press delete layer mask. We're going to reset all the settings, set the opacity to 100, the blending mode to normal. And now we're going to blur this. We're going to go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. We're creating ambient lighting this time, so we do not want the rays to be visible. So this radius is actually pretty good. We could even go a little bit stronger. That's good. So the radius we have right now is 193.5 pixels. So we're going to press OK. Now we're going to go ahead and change the blending mode back to screen. We're going to fade this a little bit, so we're going to change the opacity. Let's change it pretty low. And now we want this lighting to affect only the background, not the flowers themselves. what we're going to do is we're going to mask out the flowers. So we're going to go select, load selection, where it says channel. We're going to select flowers. We're going to press OK. And then we're going to click on this button right here. And what this does is actually the opposite of what we want. So we're going to invert the mask. We're going to press Control-I on a PC or Command-I on a Mac. And now we've masked out the flowers, and the lighting only affects the area around the flowers. So we're going to duplicate this layer again. We're going to press right-click, duplicate layer. We're going to remove the mask, because what we want to do is we want to blur the layer a little bit more. And sometimes when you do that, it also blurs the mask. We're going to remove the mask temporarily. Right-click, delete layer mask. And then we're going to blur this some more. Filter. Well, we're actually going to set the opacity to 100%, just so that we have a better idea of what we're doing. We're going to change the blend mode to normal. And then we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Let's change this to something less than that. So the radius is now 45.6 pixels. Press OK. Once again, change the blending mode from normal to screen. Adjust the opacity. 10%. Go with 10%. Now we're going to apply the same mask. We're going to go to Select, Load Selection, Channel, Flowers. This time we're going to check Invert. We're going to press OK. And then we're going to press this button right here. Okay. Now we're going to make a group from these layers. Right-click both of them. Right-click both of them and press Group from Layers. Name this group Lighting, Ambient Golden. Press OK. And apply a mask, just in case. And we're going to adjust the opacity a little bit, set it to 70 to 88%. And now let's add in the white ambient light. Now we're going to add in some white ambient light. What we're going to do is we're going to press Layer, New, Layer. We're going to call it White Ambient Light 1. Number 1, and press OK. Now we're going to use the gradient tool. Let's select the gradient tool. This time we want to make sure we have a radial gradient selected, and we want it to be a black and a white gradient. What we're going to do is we're going to draw our gradient. And then I'm going to show you the effect it has immediately. So we're going to go and change the blend mode from normal to screen. As you can see, what it does is it adds some soft, diffused white lighting to the image. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer twice. Right-click, duplicate layer. OK. Right-click, duplicate layer. OK. And now we're going to blur each of these layers a different number of times. We'll start with the topmost layer, and we'll blur this layer 4 times. We're going to apply a radial blur this time, so we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. We're going to set the amount to 100. We're going to make sure that the blur method is set to zoom. Now, if you open up your window and it looks like this, what you need to do is you need to click in the middle and drag that point to the upper right-hand side so that you have the rays coming out the way you want them to. You want the rays to match where you place the light. We're going to set quality to good, and we're going to press OK. And as I said, we're going to apply this 3 times. We're going to go Filter, Radial Blur again. And we're going to do it one more time. Filter, Radial Blur. Actually, let's go ahead and apply this 4 times. So filter, radial blur. Now we're going to select the middle layer, and we're going to apply the radial blur filter twice. We do not need to adjust the settings. We're just going to apply the same settings to the radial blur and apply it to the middle layer. So filter, radial blur, filter, radial blur. And now we're going to adjust the opacity for each of these layers. So like I said before, we want multiple layers of the same thing at lower opacities. So let's set the opacity here to 12%, the opacity here to 5%, 8%, and the opacity for the first one, let's set that to 27%. So now, as you see, we've added in some really soft, beautiful lighting. So now let's group these layers. Select all of them, right-click, group from layers. Call this group lighting, ambient white. Press OK. Add a layer mask. Mask out the parts that we do not want affected by the ambient lighting. So as before, we do not want the flowers affected, so we're going to go to Select, Load Selection, Channel, we select Flowers, we check Invert, press OK. Now, since we already have added the mask, what we need to do is make sure that right here, the black is in the background. So click here to put the black in the background, and now press Delete. Actually, I messed up, but that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to deselect, and we're going to invert the mask. So Control-I on PC or Command-I on Mac. Okay, so now that looks really nice. And we're going to adjust the opacity a little bit. Just a tiny bit. So let's close this group now. We're going to click this button right here. Let's change the opacity to 80%. That's the opacity of the entire group lighting to 80%. And now I want to darken this part right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a curves layer. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curves, call it Darkening. Press OK. I'm going to select the point in the middle, and I'm going to drag it down just a little. Okay, now I'm going to press Layers. I'm going to have the mask selected. I'm going to select my paintbrush, painting with black, working with a very large brush, and I'm going to paint out the areas that I do not want darkened. I only really want the area directly behind the flower darkened. Okay, so now I'm going to apply a blurring effect to the mask so there's more of a natural transition between the parts that are affected by the curves layer and the parts that are not. Let's press Filter, Blur, Box Blur. Let's apply a more intense box blur. Okay, that's good. Let's actually adjust the lighting a little bit more. So let's change the opacity. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and paint on our mask a little bit more. There. You definitely do not want the light darkened. You just want the area behind the flower. Okay, that looks good. Let's save it. File save. So what are the takeaways from this video? Well, one of the most important things to note is that when adding in lighting, it is best to add in multiple layers that have been adjusted to different intensities, and then to blend these layers by adjusting the opacities of each. This is true for many tools, especially when working with something like gradient maps. Second thing is that you can use light overlays to add in light, but you can also add in soft, diffuse white lighting easily by simply creating an empty layer, drawing a black and white radial gradient on that empty layer, and then setting the blend mode of that layer to screen. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to NVIDIA's channel for more videos like this.